The gunshot that shattered the evening quiet missed Colt Patterson by 3 inches, embedding itself in the saloon doorframe where his head had been a heartbeat before. He hit the dusty street of Santa Fe hard, rolling behind a water trough as 2 more shots rang out, and by the time he had his revolver drawn, the shooter was already galloping out of town in a cloud of New Mexico dust. Colt stayed low, breathing hard, his heart hammering against his ribs as townspeople peered cautiously from windows and doorways. That made the 3rd attempt on his life in as many weeks, and he still had no idea who wanted him dead or why. He pushed himself up slowly, holstering his weapon and brushing the dirt from his leather vest. The marshal, a portly man named Hendricks, emerged from the general store with his rifle held loosely at his side. "You all right, Patterson?" Hendricks called. "Fine," Colt said, his voice rough. He did not elaborate. He never did. Speaking about his troubles had never solved a single one, and he saw no reason to start now. The marshal nodded, seemingly unsatisfied but not surprised. Everyone in Santa Fe knew Colt Patterson as the silent type, the cowboy who worked the Brennan Ranch outside town and kept to himself with an almost religious devotion. He had drifted into New Mexico territory 2 years ago in 1878, when he was 24, with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a past he never discussed. Now, at 26, he had carved out a quiet existence for himself, and he preferred it that way. But someone was determined to end that existence, and Colt could not figure out why. He walked down the street toward the boarding house where he kept a room, ignoring the stares of the townsfolk. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step, and the September sun beat down on his shoulders with the kind of relentless heat that made a man's shirt stick to his back. Santa Fe was beautiful in its own harsh way, all adobe buildings and endless sky, but right now Colt barely noticed. His mind was working through the problem like a man trying to solve a puzzle in the dark. He had no enemies that he knew of. He did not gamble, did not chase women, did not pick fights. He worked hard, kept his nose clean, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. So who would want him dead? The question followed him into the boarding house and up the creaking stairs to his room. He locked the door behind him, checked the window, and then sat on the edge of his narrow bed with his head in his hands. The silence that usually comforted him felt oppressive now, like walls closing in. He needed to think. He needed to figure this out before the next shooter had better aim, but when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the muzzle flash and feel the whistle of the bullet past his ear. That evening, hunger drove him out of his room despite his better judgment. He could have stayed holed up, could have gone without supper, but Colt had learned long ago that starving yourself did not solve problems. So he made his way to the small restaurant on the edge of town, a place called Resita's that served decent food and attracted fewer of the rowdy types who frequented the saloons. The restaurant was nearly empty when he arrived, just an old Mexican couple finishing their meal in one corner, and a woman sitting alone by the window. Colt took a table near the back, positioning himself so he could watch the door, and waited for Resita herself to come take his order. But his eyes kept drifting to the woman by the window. She was young, probably close to his age, with honey-colored hair pinned up in a simple style, and a dress that had seen better days but was clean and carefully mended. Her face was turned toward the street, and even in profile, Colt could see the sadness etched into her features. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, but there was something about her stillness that spoke of loneliness rather than contentment. Resita appeared at his elbow, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with flour dusted on her apron. "Colt," she greeted him warmly. She was one of the few people in town who tried to engage him in conversation, though she had learned not to expect much in return. "The usual," he nodded. "You look troubled tonight," Rosita observed, her dark eyes studying him with maternal concern. "More than usual." Colt hesitated, then shrugged slightly. He did not want to talk about the shooting. Rosita sighed but did not press. She glanced over at the woman by the window and lowered her voice. "That is Winona Vance. She has been coming here every evening for the past month, always alone. Such a shame. A young woman like that should not be so isolated." Colt said nothing, but he found himself looking at Winona Vance again. Now that Rosita had mentioned it, there was something particularly desolate about the way she sat there, like someone going through the motions of living without really participating in life. "She is a schoolteacher," Rosita continued, warming to her subject. "Came here from Kansas City to teach the children, but the town has not exactly welcomed her. She lives in that little house behind the church, all by herself. I do not think she has made a single friend since she arrived." Colt understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. Rosita patted his shoulder and went to place his order, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He tried to focus on watching the door, on staying alert for any potential threats, but his gaze kept returning to Winona Vance. She had ordered food, he noticed, but she was barely eating it, just pushing it around her plate with her fork. The loneliness radiating from her was palpable, and something about it resonated with the loneliness he carried in his own chest. He was still watching when she suddenly turned and met his eyes. Colt looked away quickly, embarrassed to have been caught staring. But not before he saw the flash of something in her expression, recognition of a kindred spirit perhaps, or maybe just surprise that anyone had noticed her at all. When Rosita brought his food, beef and beans with fresh tortillas, he ate mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He was halfway through his meal when he heard the scrape of a chair and looked up to see Winona Vance standing beside his table. Up close, she was even prettier than he had realized, with clear blue eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose. But it was the vulnerability in her expression that caught him off guard, the way she looked at him like she was taking a leap of faith just by approaching. "Excuse me," she said softly. Her voice had a slight tremor to it, as if she was nervous. "I could not help but notice you were dining alone, as am I. I realize this is terribly forward of me, but would you mind if I joined you, just for the company?" Colt stared at her, stunned. No one ever sought out his company. He had built his entire life around being left alone, and now this stranger was asking to sit with him, to share a meal, to break through the walls he had so carefully constructed. He should have said no. Every instinct told him to decline politely and return to his solitary meal. But as he looked into Winona Vance's eyes, he saw the same desperate loneliness he felt, and he found himself nodding before he could think better of it. Relief flooded her face. "Thank you," she breathed, and pulled out the chair across from him. She settled into it with a grace that spoke of good breeding, and for a moment they just sat there in awkward silence. Colt had no idea what to say. Social interaction was not his strength, and having an actual conversation with a woman was so far outside his normal experience that he felt completely adrift. Winona seemed to sense his discomfort. "My name is Winona Vance," she offered. "I teach at the schoolhouse." He nodded. "Colt Patterson." Another silence fell, but this one felt less oppressive somehow. Winona took a small bite of her food, and Colt returned to his own meal. They ate in companionable quiet for several minutes, and slowly, Colt felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "I heard about the shooting this afternoon," Winona said eventually. "Are you hurt?" Colt shook his head. "You know who did it?" He shook his head again. Winona studied him thoughtfully. "You do not talk much, do you?" For the first time in recent memory, Colt felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward in something almost like a smile. He shook his head a third time, and Winona laughed, a soft sound that seemed surprised to escape her own lips. "Well," she said, "that is all right. I have been talking to myself for so long that I can probably carry a conversation for both of us." And to Colt's surprise, she did exactly that. She began telling him about her day, about the children in her classroom and their progress with reading, about the adobe schoolhouse that baked in the sun and made the afternoons almost unbearable. She talked about Kansas City and how different New Mexico territory was, about missing trees and rain but finding a strange beauty in the desert landscape. Colt listened, really listened, and found himself fascinated. Winona Vance had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and poetic, and her gentle voice filled the empty spaces inside him that he had been carrying for so long. He did not contribute much to the conversation beyond the occasional nod or grunt of acknowledgement, but Winona did not seem to mind. She talked easily, as if releasing months of pent-up words, and Colt realized that she had been just as starved for human connection as he was. By the time they finished their meals, full darkness had fallen outside. Rosita came to clear their plates, and Colt saw the knowing smile on her face as she looked between them. "I should walk you home," Colt said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Winona. He had spoken more in that single sentence than he usually did in an entire day. Winona's eyes widened. "Oh, you do not have to do that. It is dark," Colt said simply. "Not safe for a woman alone." Something flickered across Winona's face, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I would appreciate that." They stepped out into the cool night air, and Colt was immediately alert, his hand resting casually near his revolver. Santa Fe after dark was a different place than during the day, full of shadows and potential threats. But the walk to the little house behind the church was mercifully uneventful. Winona stopped at her gate and turned to face him. In the moonlight, her face looked almost luminous. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson, for the company at supper and for seeing me home safely." "Colt," he said. "Just Colt." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "Then you must call me Winona," he nodded, and they stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Would you," Winona began hesitantly, "would you like to have supper together again tomorrow, at Rosita's?" Colt considered. He had lived alone for so long, had wrapped himself in silence like armor. But tonight, sharing a meal with Winona, listening to her talk, he had felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Not the empty silence he usually sought, but the peace that came from genuine human connection. "Yes," he said. Winona's smile grew brighter. "Tomorrow evening, then. I will see you there." He waited until she was safely inside her house before turning to make his way back to the boarding house. As he walked through the dark streets of Santa Fe, Colt found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Colt worked his usual shift at the Brennan Ranch, mending fences and moving cattle, but his mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. He found himself thinking about Winona, about her gentle voice and the loneliness in her eyes that mirrored his own. It unsettled him how much he was looking forward to seeing her again. He arrived at Rosita's a few minutes early and took the same table as the night before. Rosita appeared almost immediately, her eyes twinkling with barely suppressed delight. "So you are back," she said. "And waiting for someone, I think." Colt felt heat rise in his face, but before he could respond, the door opened and Winona walked in. She had changed from her schoolteacher clothes into a dress of soft green that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had taken her hair down, letting it fall in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, and Colt felt something shift in his chest. "Hello, Colt," Winona said, settling into the chair across from him. There was a confidence in her movements tonight that had not been there the evening before, as if their shared meal had given her permission to relax slightly. "Winona," he acknowledged with a nod. They ordered their food, and once again, Winona began to talk. But tonight, she asked him questions too, gently probing into his life with a curiosity that was genuine rather than intrusive. "How long have you been in Santa Fe?" she asked. 2 years, Colt replied. "Where did you come from before that?" He hesitated. "Texas. Before that, Missouri." "You have family?" The question touched a nerve, and Colt felt his jaw tighten. No, Winona must have seen something in his expression because she backed off immediately. "I am sorry." "I did not mean to pry into painful subjects." Colt took a breath and forced himself to relax. "It is all right. Just not much to tell. Lost my parents when I was young. Raised by my uncle until I was old enough to strike out on my own." "That must have been difficult," Winona said softly. He shrugged. "You make do," she nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I lost my parents too, though I was older. 18. They both died of typhoid within a week of each other. That was 5 years ago." "That why you came out here?" Colt asked. "No family holding you in Kansas City?" "Partly," Winona admitted. "I had an aunt, but she passed last year. After that, there was nothing keeping me there. I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher position in Santa Fe and thought a fresh start might do me good." "Has it?" Winona was quiet for a moment, considering. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "The children are wonderful, and I love teaching them. But the town has been slow to accept me. I think they expected someone older, someone more established. Instead, they got a young woman from the East with no connections and no experience. The other women in town barely speak to me." "Their loss," Colt said gruffly. Winona's eyes met his, and she smiled. "That is kind of you to say." They fell into a comfortable rhythm after that, with Winona doing most of the talking but Colt contributing more than he usually would. He found himself telling her about the ranch, about the work he did, and the satisfaction he took in it. He even told her about his horse, a bay gelding named Copper, with more enthusiasm than he had shown for anything in years. When they finished their meal, Colt walked her home again, and this time the silence between them felt companionable rather than awkward. At her gate, Winona turned to him with a question in her eyes. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked hopefully. "Yes," Colt said without hesitation. And so it became their routine. Every evening they met at Resita's for supper. Winona would talk about her students and her day, and slowly, gradually, Colt began to open up about his own life. He told her things he had never told anyone, about the loneliness that had dogged him since childhood, about the way he had learned to find comfort in silence, because words had always failed him. Winona listened to it all with compassion and understanding, never judging, never pushing for more than he was ready to give. And in return, she shared her own struggles, her own fears and dreams. She told him about the isolation she felt in Santa Fe, about how hard it was to be a single woman in a frontier town where everyone already had their established social circles. She confessed that she had been on the verge of giving up and going back east when she had approached him that first night at Resita's. "I do not know what made me do it," she admitted one evening about 2 weeks into their shared suppers. "I saw you sitting there, and I just knew somehow that you understood what it felt like to be alone. I took a chance, and I am so glad I did." "Me too," Colt said quietly. Their connection deepened with each passing day. Colt found himself thinking about Winona constantly when they were apart, counting down the hours until he could see her again. He lived for those evening meals, for the sound of her voice and the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him. He was falling in love with her. He realized one October morning as he worked on the ranch. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a kind of wonder. He had never believed he would find someone who could accept his quiet nature, who did not see his silence as a flaw to be fixed, but as simply part of who he was. But his growing feelings for Winona were complicated by the continuing threat on his life. There had been 2 more attempts, both unsuccessful, and Colt was no closer to figuring out who was behind them. He had started varying his routes around town, staying alert at all times, but the constant vigilance was exhausting. He had not told Winona about the other attempts. He did not want to worry her, and part of him feared that if she knew the danger that surrounded him, she might decide his company was not worth the risk. But secrets had a way of coming to light, and Colt's came crashing out on a Wednesday evening in mid-October. He was walking to meet Winona at Resita's when he saw 3 men waiting in the alley beside the restaurant. Something about their stance set off alarm bells in his head, and he stopped in his tracks, hand moving to his revolver. "Colt Patterson," one of them called out. He was a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, and his voice carried the flat tone of someone who had made killing into a profession. "We need to have a talk." "Do not think I know you," Colt said carefully, positioning himself so he could see all 3 men at once. "You knew my brother," the scarred man said. "Jack Garrett. You killed him 2 years ago in Texas." The name hit Colt like a punch to the gut. He remembered Jack Garrett, remembered the confrontation outside a saloon in Austin. Garrett had been drunk and mean, picking a fight with a young woman who had rejected his advances. Colt had intervened, and when Garrett drew his gun, Colt had been faster. It had been a clean shoot, ruled self-defense by the local sheriff. But apparently Jack Garrett's brother did not see it that way. "He drew first," Colt said flatly. "It was self-defense." "He was drunk," the scarred man, who must be Garrett's brother, snarled. "You could have walked away. Instead, you killed him." "He was attacking a woman," Colt replied. "I could not walk away from that." "Well, now you will pay for it," Garrett said, and his hand moved toward his gun. Colt was faster. He always was. His revolver cleared leather in a blur of motion, and he fired 2 shots in rapid succession. Garrett went down, clutching his shoulder, and the other 2 men scattered, clearly not willing to die for someone else's vengeance. The shots brought people running, including Marshall Hendricks, and to Colt's dismay, Winona. She burst out of Resita's with her eyes wide with fear, and when she saw him standing over Garrett with his gun drawn, she went pale. "Colt," she gasped. "What happened?" He wanted to explain, wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in his throat the way they always did when emotions ran high. Instead, he just stood there, frozen, as the marshal took control of the situation. Hendricks hauled Garrett to his feet and examined his shoulder wound. "Not fatal," he pronounced, "but you will be spending time in my jail. Someone fetch the doctor." He turned to Colt. "What happened here?" Colt found his voice. "He ambushed me. Said I killed his brother 2 years ago in Texas. Was self-defense then, self-defense now." Hendricks nodded slowly. "I will need you to come to my office and give a statement." "Later," Colt said. His eyes were on Winona, who stood a few feet away looking shaken. "I need to talk to someone first." The marshal followed his gaze and nodded understanding. "All right, come by in an hour." Colt holstered his revolver and approached Winona carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. "Can we talk?" She nodded mutely, and he led her away from the crowd to a quiet spot behind the church. In the fading light, he could see her hands trembling. "This is what you have been dealing with," she said. It was not a question. "This is why you have been so watchful, why you always position yourself to see the door. Someone has been trying to kill you." "Yes," Colt admitted. Why did you not tell me? The hurt in her voice cut him deep. I did not want to worry you, did not want you to feel like being around me put you in danger. That was not your decision to make, Winona said sharply, then her voice softened. I care about you, Colt. These past weeks have meant everything to me. You have to know that. I care about you too, Colt said roughly. The words felt inadequate for what he actually felt, but they were the best he could manage. More than I have ever cared about anyone. That is why I wanted to keep you out of it. Winona stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. Do you understand that your silence hurt me more than the truth would have? I thought we were building something together, but you kept this huge part of your life hidden from me. I am sorry, Colt said, and he meant it. You are right. I should have told you. I am just not good at this, at opening up and sharing things. It does not come naturally to me. I know, Winona said gently. But if this is going to work, if we are going to continue, you have to try. I cannot be in a relationship where I am kept in the dark about things that matter. Relationship, Colt repeated, latching onto the word. Is that what this is? A smile tugged at Winona's lips despite the tension of the moment. What did you think it was? I did not let myself think about it, Colt admitted. Seemed too good to be true. Well, it is true, Winona said. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The touch sent warmth flooding through him. I am falling in love with you, Colt Patterson. These weeks of sharing supper with you, of trading my loneliness for your company, they have been the happiest of my life. I do not want to lose that. Colt's throat felt tight. I am falling in love with you too, he managed. Already have fallen, truth be told. You make me want to be better, to try harder, to be more than just the silent cowboy everyone expects. Winona squeezed his hand. I like the silent cowboy. But I also need him to trust me enough to let me in, even when it is hard. I can do that, Colt promised. I will do that. She smiled and stood on her toes to press a kiss to his cheek. It was brief and chaste, but it felt like a seal on a promise, a commitment to move forward together. Come on, she said. You need to give your statement to the marshal. Then we are having a proper supper and you are going to tell me everything. And he did. Over plates of Rosita's enchiladas, Colt told Winona the whole story about Jack Garrett, about the shooting in Texas and why he had left. He told her about drifting from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, until he had landed in Santa Fe and found a measure of peace. Winona listened without interruption, and when he finished, she reached across the table and took his hands in hers. You did the right thing, she said firmly. Both then and now, you protected someone who needed protecting. That says everything about your character. His brother did not see it that way, Colt pointed out. His brother was a fool blinded by grief and anger, Winona countered. But it is over now. He will be in jail and you will be safe. Colt hoped she was right. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Colt's life. With the threat of the Garrett vendetta behind him, he was free to focus entirely on his growing relationship with Winona. They continued their evening suppers at Rosita's, but now they also took walks together on weekends, exploring the beautiful landscapes around Santa Fe. Winona showed him her favorite spots, a canyon where wildflowers grew in defiance of the desert heat, a mesa where you could see for miles in every direction. And Colt, in turn, taught her to ride properly, not just the side-saddle way she had learned as a girl, but astride, the way that gave you real control of the horse. He loved watching her face light up as she galloped across open ground on a borrowed mare from the ranch, her hair streaming behind her and her laughter echoing across the landscape. In those moments, she looked utterly free, and Colt felt privileged to be part of that freedom. They talked more too, or rather, Winona talked and Colt contributed more than he ever had before. He found that the more time he spent with her, the easier it became to share his thoughts and feelings. She never pushed or demanded, but her patient acceptance created a space where he felt safe opening up. He told her about his childhood, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 8 and being sent to live with his uncle. His uncle had been a hard man, not cruel exactly, but not affectionate either. Colt had learned early that expressing emotions or needs was seen as weakness, and he had adapted by becoming quiet and self-sufficient. "That must have been so lonely," Winona said when he finished. They were sitting on a blanket watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "It was," Colt admitted, "but I did not know anything different, so I thought it was normal. It was not until I got older that I realized other people had different ways of living, of being with each other." "And you never learned how to do it differently," Winona said softly. "No," Colt agreed. "I tried sometimes, but it always felt awkward and forced. Like I was pretending to be someone I was not. Eventually, I just accepted that I was meant to be alone." "But you are not alone anymore," Winona pointed out. Colt turned to look at her, this woman who had changed everything. "No," he said, "I am not, and I do not want to be ever again." Winona leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The quiet between them was not empty or lonely anymore. It was full of understanding and affection, of two people who had found each other against all odds. As November arrived and the weather began to cool, Colt realized he needed to make his intentions clear. He loved Winona, completely and irrevocably, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. But asking a woman to marry him required more than just wanting it. He needed to be able to provide for her, to give her the kind of life she deserved. He approached his boss at the ranch, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Brennan, about increasing his responsibilities and wages. "Thinking of settling down, are you?" Brennan asked with a knowing look. Colt nodded. "If she will have me." Brennan studied him for a long moment. "You are a good worker, Patterson, reliable and honest. I would be happy to make you my foreman. It comes with a significant raise and a house on the property. Place is not fancy, but it is solid and has 3 bedrooms." "That would be perfect," Colt said, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "She is a lucky woman, whoever she is," Brennan said, clapping him on the shoulder. "When do you want to start?" "First of the year." "Done. But that means you will need to propose soon if you want to have a wedding before you move into that house." Colt smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I am working on it." The question was how to propose. Colt had never been good with words, and the idea of some grand romantic gesture filled him with anxiety. But he knew Winona deserved something special, something that showed her how much she meant to him. He sought advice from the one person in town who knew both him and Winona well. Rosita's face lit up when he approached her. "You want to ask her to marry you," she said gleefully. "I knew it. I knew from the first night you two sat together that this would happen." "I do not know how," Colt confessed. "I am not good with fancy words or romantic gestures." Rosita patted his hand. "That girl does not need fancy words. She needs sincerity and honesty, which you have in abundance. Just speak from your heart." "But where? How?" Rosita thought for a moment. "What is a place that means something to both of you?" "Somewhere that represents what you have built together," Colt considered. The canyon with the wildflowers was beautiful, but it was Winona's place, not theirs. The mesa was too exposed, and then it struck him. "Here," he said, "Rosita's. This is where we met, where we have shared every meal together for the past 2 months. This is where everything started." Rosita's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect, and I will help you make it special." They planned it for the following Friday evening. Rosita would close the restaurant early to everyone except Colt and Winona. and she would prepare a special meal. Colt would ask Winona to marry him in the place where they had first traded his silence for her company and her loneliness for his. The days leading up to Friday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Colt was a bundle of nerves, second-guessing himself constantly. What if she said no? What if he had misread their relationship? What if she did not want to tie herself to a quiet cowboy with a complicated past? But when Friday evening arrived and he saw Winona waiting for him outside Resita's, all his doubts evaporated. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and her face lit up with joy when she saw him. "You are late," she teased gently. "I was beginning to worry." "Sorry," Colt said. "Had some things to take care of." She took his arm and they walked into the restaurant together. Winona stopped short when she saw that they were alone, that Resita had set up a single table near the window with candles and flowers. "Colt," she breathed, "what is this?" "Sit down," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please." Winona sat, her eyes wide with curiosity and something that looked like hope. Colt took the seat across from her, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Resita appeared with plates of food, smiled at them both, and then disappeared into the kitchen to give them privacy. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was a charged silence, full of anticipation. Finally, Colt pushed his plate aside and reached across the table to take Winona's hands in his. "I need to tell you something," he began, and then stopped, frustrated with himself. This was important. He needed to get it right. He started again. 2 months ago, I was alone. I had convinced myself that alone was what I wanted, that silence and solitude were enough. And then you walked up to my table and asked if you could join me for supper." Winona's eyes were already shining with unshed tears. "You traded your loneliness for my company," Colt continued, the words coming easier now. "And I traded my silence for yours, and everything changed. You changed me, Winona. You made me want to be more, to do more, to feel more. You made me believe that I could have a life full of connection and love instead of just empty quiet." "Colt," Winona whispered. He pushed back his chair and dropped to one knee beside the table. Winona's hands flew to her mouth, and tears began streaming down her face. "I love you," Colt said simply. "I want to spend every evening for the rest of my life having supper with you, listening to you talk about your day, sharing mine with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Winona Vance, will you marry me?" He had bought a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had taken most of his savings. He pulled it from his pocket now and held it up to her, his hand steady despite the emotion coursing through him. Winona was crying in earnest now, but she was also smiling, her whole face radiant with joy. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Colt slipped the ring onto her finger, and then Winona was pulling him to his feet and into her arms. They held each other tightly, and Colt felt something break open inside his chest, a dam of emotion he had held back for so long finally releasing. "I love you so much," Winona said against his shoulder. "You have made me so happy." "You have done the same for me," Colt replied. "You have given me a reason to talk, to share, to be part of the world instead of just existing in it." They pulled apart just enough to kiss, a tender meeting of lips that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, Resita emerged from the kitchen with a bottle of wine and tears streaming down her own face. "Congratulations," she said, embracing them both. "I am so happy for you." They celebrated late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. Colt told Winona about the foreman position and the house that came with it, and she cried again with happiness. 3 bedrooms, she said wonderingly, enough room for a family. "Is that something you want?" Colt asked. "Children," Very much, Winona said. Do you? Colt thought about it, about the childhood he had had and the different kind of childhood he could give his own children. Yes, he said. I want to be the kind of father I never had, patient and present and loving. You will be, Winona assured him. I have no doubt of that. They decided to marry in December, before Christmas. It would be a simple ceremony, just them and a few close friends, but Colt did not care about the size or spectacle. All that mattered was making Winona his wife. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Winona sewed herself a dress with help from Reseda, a beautiful creation of cream-colored silk that had been ordered from back east. Colt bought a new suit, his first ever, and felt ridiculous and wonderful in it at the same time. They found a minister willing to perform the ceremony, and Winona invited her students and their families. To her delight and surprise, many of them accepted, and Colt realized that through him, she had finally started to become part of the community. His acceptance of her, his public courtship and proposal, had given her the legitimacy she had lacked as a single woman alone in town. Samuel Brennan and his wife attended, as did Marshall Hendricks and several of Colt's co-workers from the ranch. Even some of the townspeople who had never given Colt the time of day showed up, curious about the silent cowboy who had won the pretty schoolteacher's heart. The ceremony took place on a crisp December afternoon in the small church behind which Winona lived. Sun streamed through the windows, casting patterns of light on the wooden floor, and Colt stood at the altar feeling more nervous than he had ever been in his life. And then Winona appeared in the doorway, and everything else fell away. She looked like an angel in her silk dress with her hair arranged in soft curls and flowers woven through it. But it was her face that stopped Colt's heart, the radiant happiness shining from every feature. She walked down the aisle toward him, and when she took his hands, Colt felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage. Colt barely heard the words. All his attention was focused on Winona, on the woman who had changed everything. When it came time for their vows, Colt took a deep breath. He had spent days working on what he wanted to say, writing and rewriting until he had something that felt true. "Winona," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I am not a man of many words, and you know that better than anyone, but I want to make you a promise. I promise to share my silence with you, to let you into my quiet spaces and my solitary moments. I promise to talk to you even when it is hard, to tell you what I am thinking and feeling. I promise to be present, to be a partner, to build a life with you based on honesty and trust and love. You saved me from a loneliness I did not even realize was killing me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again." Winona was crying again, but her voice was strong when she spoke her own vows. "Colt, you gave me something I had stopped believing in, companionship without expectation, acceptance without judgment. You let me be myself, all the messy, talkative, too much parts of myself, and you never once made me feel like I needed to change. I promise to cherish your quiet nature, to never try to make you into something you are not. I promise to fill our home with warmth and laughter and love, to build a family with you, to be your partner in all things. You are my home now, and I am yours." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Colt kissed Winona, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and out into the December sunshine as man and wife. The reception was held at Reseda's, naturally, with food and music and dancing. Colt was not much of a dancer, but he made an exception for Winona, holding her close as they swayed to a fiddle tune played by one of the ranchers. "Happy?" he asked, looking down at his wife. Happier than I ever thought possible, Winona replied. You, same, Colt said. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for asking to join me that night, for being brave enough to reach out. Thank you for saying yes, Winona countered, for giving us a chance. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, in Colt's small room that would be their home for just one more month before they moved into the foreman's house. It was cramped and simple, but neither of them cared. They were together, finally and completely, and that was all that mattered. In the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Colt marveled at how much his life had changed. 6 months ago he had been alone and hunted, convinced that solitude was his fate. Now he had a wife, a home, a future full of promise and possibility. "What are you thinking?" Winona asked sleepily. Colt kissed her hair. "That I am the luckiest man alive." "Good," Winona said, snuggling closer, "because I am the luckiest woman." They moved into the foreman's house on New Year's Day, 1880. The house was everything Samuel Brennan had promised. A sturdy adobe structure with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. It was small by Eastern standards, but felt like a palace to Colt, who had never had a real home of his own. Winona threw herself into making the house into a home, sewing curtains and arranging furniture, and planting a small garden in the yard. Colt watched her work with a sense of wonder, amazed that this was his life now, that he had someone who cared enough to build something beautiful for them to share. He took his new responsibilities as foreman seriously, managing the other ranch hands and overseeing the day-to-day operations. It was more work than before, but the increased pay meant they could save money and plan for the future. Winona continued teaching, though she knew she would have to give it up if she became pregnant. The thought of children excited and terrified Colt in equal measure, but Winona assured him constantly that he would be a wonderful father. "You are patient and kind," she would say. "You listen more than you talk, which means you really hear people. Those are gifts." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Learning to live together, to navigate each other's habits and quirks, required patience and compromise. Winona was naturally messy, leaving her things scattered around the house, while Colt liked everything in its place. Colt's silences sometimes frustrated Winona when she needed verbal reassurance, and she had to learn that his quiet presence was its own form of communication. But they worked through each challenge together, talking through problems and finding solutions that worked for both of them. And slowly, their house became a home, filled with laughter and love and the deep contentment that came from truly knowing and being known by another person. In the spring, Winona discovered she was pregnant. She told Colt over supper one evening at their kitchen table, her eyes shining with joy and nervousness. Colt stared at her, processing the information. A baby. They were going to have a baby. He was going to be a father. "Say something," Winona said anxiously. Colt stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a child. Are you happy?" Winona asked. "Terrified," Colt admitted. "But yes, incredibly happy." They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and what they would need, and how they would manage Winona's teaching position. Eventually, they decided she would work through the end of the school year and then take time off to focus on the baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Winona had bouts of morning sickness in the early months that left her exhausted. Colt did everything he could to help, taking over more of the household chores and making sure she ate and rested. He found himself talking to her belly in the evenings, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and the beautiful New Mexico landscape. It felt silly at first, but Winona encouraged him, and soon it became a nightly ritual. "You are going to be such a good father," Winona would say, watching him with soft eyes. In November, after a long and difficult labor, Winona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Colt's uncle who had raised him, and Brennan for Colt's boss who had given him his first real chance at stability. Holding his son for the first time, Colt felt emotions so intense they nearly overwhelmed him. This tiny person, so vulnerable and perfect, was his responsibility, his to protect and love and raise. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise I am going to do better than my father did. I am going to be here for you always." Winona watched from the bed, exhausted but happy. "He has your eyes," she said softly. "Poor kid," Colt replied, but he was smiling. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and relatively calm, but he still demanded constant attention. Colt and Winona took turns getting up with him at night, functioning on minimal sleep and maximum coffee. But even in the midst of the exhaustion, Colt had never been happier. He loved coming home from the ranch to find Winona nursing Samuel in the rocking chair, loved the weight of his son in his arms as he walked him around the house, loved watching his tiny features shift and change as he grew. He talked to Samuel constantly, narrating what he was doing and pointing out the world around them. It was easier to talk to a baby who could not judge or respond, and Colt found himself opening up in ways he never had before. "You are becoming quite the chatterbox," Winona teased one evening, watching him give Samuel a tour of the garden. "Only around people I trust," Colt replied, and it was true. With Winona and Samuel, he felt safe enough to let his guard down, to be vulnerable and open. As Samuel grew from an infant into a toddler, Colt marveled at his son's personality emerging. Samuel was curious and fearless, getting into everything and testing boundaries constantly. But he was also affectionate, quick to give hugs and kisses, and Colt found himself on the receiving end of more physical affection than he had experienced in his entire life. When Samuel was 2, Winona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, with complications that required bedrest in the final months. Colt hired a woman from town to help with Samuel and the house while Winona recovered, and he spent every spare moment at her side, reading to her and keeping her company. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, a tiny thing with a shock of dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. They named her Rose, after Rosita who had brought them together, and she was as different from Samuel as night from day. Where Samuel had been calm and easy, Rose was fussy and demanding. She cried constantly those first few months, and nothing seemed to soothe her except being held and walked around. Colt spent hours pacing the house with her, singing the few songs he knew and making up nonsense words when he ran out of real lyrics. "You have such a beautiful voice," Winona said one night, listening to him sing to Rose. Colt looked at her in surprise. He had never considered his voice anything special, had rarely sung in front of anyone. But Rose seemed to like it, quieting whenever he started, so he kept doing it. Life settled into a rhythm after Rose's birth. Colt worked at the ranch during the day while Winona managed the house and children. In the evenings, they would have supper together as a family, and Colt would help put the children to bed before he and Winona finally had time to themselves. Those quiet evening hours, sitting together on the porch and watching the sun set, were some of Colt's favorite times. They would talk about their days, their children, their dreams for the future, and sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. "You remember that first night I asked to join you for supper?" Winona asked one evening. "Every detail," Colt replied. "I was so nervous," Winona admitted. I almost talked myself out of it a dozen times, but I was so lonely, and you looked like you understood that feeling." "I did," Colt said. "I was lonely too, even though I told myself I was not." "We saved each other," Winona said softly. Colt squeezed her hand. "We did." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. A third child, another boy they named Thomas, arrived when Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3. And then, when Colt was 34 and Winona was 30, their final child, a daughter named Catherine, completed their family. The foreman's house that had once seemed so spacious now felt comfortably full, bustling with activity and noise and life. Colt had to add on 2 more rooms to accommodate everyone, working in his spare time with help from the other ranch hands. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and spent every spare moment at the ranch learning from his father. Rose was spirited and creative, constantly putting on shows and making up stories. Thomas was the peacemaker of the family, always trying to smooth over conflicts and make everyone happy. And Catherine, the baby, was spoiled by everyone and loved every minute of it. Watching his children grow and thrive, Colt felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he had imagined. He had broken the cycle of his own lonely childhood, had created a home full of love and laughter and connection. His children would never have to wonder if they were wanted or valued. They would grow up knowing they were cherished. Winona was an incredible mother, patient and loving but firm when necessary. She taught the children to read and write, preparing them for school, and she filled their home with music and stories and joy. And she continued to be Colt's partner in every sense of the word, the person he trusted most in the world. Their relationship had only deepened over the years, growing from those first tentative conversations over supper into something solid and enduring. They knew each other completely now, all the good and the bad, and loved each other anyway. Colt still was not a man of many words, but he had learned to express himself in ways that mattered. He told Winona he loved her every day, showed it in countless small gestures and acts of service. And Winona, who had once been so lonely she had taken a chance on a silent cowboy, never let a day pass without reminding him how grateful she was that he had said yes. As Colt reached his mid-40s, Samuel Brennan announced his retirement and offered Colt the opportunity to buy the ranch. It was a huge decision, one that would require taking on significant debt, but after discussing it with Winona, Colt decided to take the leap. The Patterson Ranch, as it became known, flourished under Colt's management. He treated his workers fairly, paid them well, and earned a reputation as a tough but good boss. Samuel, now 18, worked alongside him full-time, learning every aspect of the business in preparation for eventually taking over himself. Rose had gone back east to study art, sending letters home full of excitement about her classes and the people she was meeting. Thomas, at 15, was showing an interest in law and talking about becoming a lawyer. And Catherine, at 12, was still deciding who she wanted to be but showed promise in everything she tried. Winona had gone back to teaching part-time once the children were all in school, and she loved being back in the classroom. But her favorite part of each day was still the evening, when the family gathered for supper and shared stories about their days. It had all started with supper. Colt reflected one evening as he watched his family around the table. A lonely woman asking to join a silent cowboy for a meal. And from that simple beginning they had built this beautiful, complicated, wonderful life. "What are you thinking about?" Winona asked, catching his eye. "About how lucky I am," Colt replied. Winona smiled, the same radiant smile that had captured his heart nearly 20 years ago. "We both are." And she was right. They had taken their loneliness and silence and traded them for something infinitely better: companionship, love, and a life full of meaning and purpose. They had found each other when they both needed someone most, and they had built something that would last generations. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Colt and Winona sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. The New Mexico sky was full of stars and the air was cool and pleasant. "You ever miss it?" Winona asked. "The silence, the solitude." Colt considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There are moments when the house is full of noise and chaos that I crave a little quiet. But then I remember what my life was like before you, and I would not trade this for anything. Even when Rose is practicing her violin." Winona teased. Rose was enthusiastic about music but not particularly talented, and her practice sessions could be trying. "Even then," Colt confirmed, and they both laughed. "I love you," Winona said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you too," Colt replied. "More than I can say." "You do pretty well," Winona assured him. "You have come a long way from the cowboy who could barely string 3 words together." "I had a good teacher," Colt said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Colt thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first evening at Rosita's to this moment, they had built a life together, one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time. It had not always been easy. There had been challenges and struggles, moments of doubt and fear. But they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. "Thank you," Colt said suddenly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to approach me that night. For seeing past my silence to the person underneath. For giving me a chance." Winona lifted her head to look at him. "Thank you for taking that chance. For opening up to me, for letting me in. For building this life with me." They kissed, a tender expression of love that had only grown stronger with time. And then they went inside together, to the home they had created, to the family they had built, to the life they had made from nothing more than 2 lonely people sharing a meal. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. Samuel married a kind young woman from town and gave Colt and Winona their first grandchild, a little girl they named Winona after her grandmother. Rose returned from the East with her own husband, a fellow artist, and they settled in Santa Fe where she opened a gallery. Thomas did become a lawyer, practicing in Albuquerque but visiting often. And Catherine, the baby of the family, shocked everyone by becoming a rancher like her father, taking over the day-to-day operations of the Patterson ranch as Colt gradually stepped back. Colt and Winona grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They still had supper together every evening, though now it was often at the main ranch house with Catherine and her family, or at Samuel's place, or with one of their other children. But once a month, they made a pilgrimage to Rosita's, which was now run by Rosita's daughter but still served the same delicious food. They sat at the same table where they had met, where Colt had said yes to Winona's request for company, and they remembered how it all began. "Best decision I ever made," Winona would say. "Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Colt would reply. And it was true. From that single act of courage, of reaching out across the loneliness to connect with another human being, everything good in their lives had flowed. When Colt was 72 and Winona was 70, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and music and stories about their life together. Samuel gave a speech, talking about his father's journey from a silent, solitary cowboy to a man who had built a family and a legacy. "My father taught me that it is never too late to change, to open yourself up to love, to become more than you thought you could be." And my mother taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask someone to share a meal with you." Everyone laughed and applauded, and Colt felt tears prick his eyes. He had never imagined, all those years ago, that his life would turn out like this, that he would be surrounded by so much love and family and joy. That night, lying in bed beside Winona in the home they had shared for 50 years, Colt held her hand and thought about everything they had been through together. "No regrets?" Winona asked sleepily. "Not a single one," Colt replied. "You? Only that I did not ask to join you for supper sooner," Winona said. Colt laughed softly. "We found each other at exactly the right time." "We did," Winona agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that you will keep talking, keep sharing, keep letting people in, even after I am gone." Colt's throat tightened. He did not want to think about a world without Winona in it, but he knew that someday one of them would have to go on without the other. "I promise," he said. "But you have to promise me the same thing. Promise me you will keep finding joy, keep connecting with people, keep living fully." "I promise," Winona said. They sealed their promises with a kiss and then fell asleep in each other's arms the way they had done for 5 decades. The years that followed were gentle ones. Colt and Winona spent their time with their family, traveling occasionally to visit Rose in Santa Fe or Thomas in Albuquerque, but mostly staying close to home. They took daily walks together, moving more slowly now, but still enjoying the beauty of the New Mexico landscape they both loved. They told stories to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down the family history and the values that had guided their lives. And they continued to have supper together every evening, sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with family, but always together. Colt's health began to decline when he was 75, his heart growing weaker with each passing month. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, except make him comfortable and cherish the time they had left. Winona refused to despair. She stayed by his side constantly, reading to him and reminiscing about their life together. And Colt, true to his promise, kept talking, kept sharing his thoughts and feelings even when it tired him. "I am not afraid," he told her one evening. "I have had a good life, better than I ever imagined possible. I have been loved and I have loved, and that is all anyone can ask for." "You have been the love of my life," Winona said, tears streaming down her face. "The best thing that ever happened to me." "And you to me," Colt replied. "You saved me, Winona. You gave me a life worth living." He passed away peacefully in his sleep a week later, with Winona holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. He was 76 years old, and he had lived more fully in the 50 years since meeting Winona than in all the lonely years before. Winona grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had known this day would come, and she had made her peace with it. Colt had given her so many years of happiness and love, and she would honor his memory by continuing to live the way they had lived together, fully, openly, and with gratitude for every day. She stayed in the ranch house, surrounded by her family, and continued her daily routines. She taught reading to the youngest grandchildren, helped Catherine manage the ranch accounts, and went to supper at Resita's once a month, sitting at their special table and remembering. 3 years after Colt's death, Winona followed him. She died in her sleep at the age of 73, and the family liked to think that she and Colt were together again, sharing another supper and talking about everything they had built in the years since a lonely schoolteacher had asked a silent cowboy if she could join him for a meal. They were buried side by side in the cemetery overlooking the ranch, their headstones bearing simple inscriptions. Colt's read, "He traded his silence for her company." Winona's read, "She traded her loneliness for his." And between them, carved in the space where their hands would have met, were the words, "Together they found home." The Patterson Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to what Colt and Winona had built together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told the story of how it all began, of two lonely people who found each other over supper and changed the course of both their lives. In Santa Fe, Rosita's restaurant became something of a landmark, known as the place where the Patterson love story began. Young couples would come seeking the same table where Colt and Winona had sat, hoping some of that magic would rub off on them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the restaurant was nearly empty, the owner would swear they could see two figures sitting by the window, an older cowboy and his wife, still sharing supper together after all these years. It was a story about courage and connection, about taking a chance when loneliness felt overwhelming, about building something beautiful from the simplest of beginnings. It was a story about a cowboy who learned to talk, and a woman who learned she did not have to be lonely anymore. But most of all, it was a love story, the kind that reminded people that sometimes the best things in life came from the smallest acts of bravery, from reaching out and asking someone, "May I join you for supper?" And when the answer was yes, when two lonely hearts found each other in a small restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the autumn of 1879, everything changed. The silence gave way to conversation, the loneliness gave way to love, and two people who had resigned themselves to solitary lives discovered that together they could create something extraordinary. That was the legacy of Colt Patterson and Winona Vance, a legacy of love and family and the enduring power of human connection. And it all started with a simple trade, his silence for her company at supper, her loneliness for his. In the end, they both got far more than they had bargained for. They got a lifetime of love, a family that spanned generations, and a story that would be told for 100 years and more. They got each other, and that was worth everything. The Patterson Ranch still stands today, though it has changed hands and been subdivided over the years. But the main house where Colt and Winona raised their family remains, carefully preserved by descendants who understand the importance of honoring where they came from. And in that house, in a place of honor above the fireplace, hangs a painting that Rose created late in her life. It shows a small restaurant interior with two figures at a table by the window, a cowboy and a young woman, their heads bent together in conversation. The painting captures a moment of connection, of two lonely people finding each other, and it serves as a reminder of where the Patterson family began. Visitors to the house often pause before that painting, touched by the story it represents. Some see it as a romance, others as a lesson about courage and vulnerability. But everyone who hears the full story comes away with the same understanding. That sometimes the most important thing we can do is reach out to someone else, offer company when it is needed, and be willing to accept it when it is offered in return. Colt Patterson and Winona Vance did not set out to create a legacy or teach lessons. They simply found each other when they both needed someone most, and they built a life together one day at a time. But in doing so, they showed everyone who came after them that it was never too late to change, to open up, to let someone in. The silent cowboy learned to talk, the lonely schoolteacher found her home, and together they created something that lasted long after they were gone. A family, a ranch, a story, and most importantly, a love that transcended time and became something eternal. And it all started over supper at Rosita's, where a woman traded her loneliness for a cowboy's silence, and they both discovered that what they received in return was worth infinitely more than what they had given up. They found love, they found family, they found purpose and meaning and joy. They found each other, and that made all the difference.